The path of an artist is full of challenges, which has pushed me to reach out to other professionals about their experiences. Join us as we explore the journeys of fine artists who have turned their passion of creating art into a profession. From their highs to their hurdles, these are real insights, breakthroughs, and triumphs to inspire other creators to reach higher. Welcome to the Business of Art podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Business of Art podcast. This week we are honored to have the Albin Veselka himself joining us, and I'm really thrilled. On a personal note here, I've known Albin for quite a while. Him and I are pretty good friends, I would say, at least from my end. I think he's a friend. I don't know what he'd say about me, but
Mark's a great guy.
But I'm going to just give you guys some of his bio points, and then we're going to listen to his journey from him. So Albin was born in 1979 in Wyoming, great place to be born. And he's actually lived in Idaho most of his life. He graduated with a BFA from BYU, Idaho in 2006. And he attributes his foundational skills to the knowledgeable faculty at BYU, Idaho. He gained early career direction and broke into the gallery scene as a college student. So he's been at least part-time professional for several years now. And he ended up being an adjunct professor at BYU, Idaho for 5 years. And he's actually been a full-time artist for 12. And most recently, his biggest accolade and recognition is he was inducted by the Cowboy Artists of America just this last year. And there's a lot more in there that we would love to hear, Albin, but that's just to kind of get off and at least give us a reason to be listening. I think you have a lot of experience here that I would love to know and hear more about, but also I think our listeners will really benefit from this. So please give us kind of the journey. We want to hear, how things started when you were young, and then everything up till now. Give us all the goods.
Okay. Well, first, thanks, Mark. That's a kind introduction. I've never been called the Albin Veselka before, so
you're welcome.
I'll add that title to my name now. So let's see. I guess we can just start at the beginning. I was I was either first or second grade. I think it was first grade, where my teacher gave us, all the students, an assignment to just draw a fox because we read a story about a fox, just kind of random. And I went home and I remember trying to draw a fox, and I was so frustrated. I couldn't figure out how to make lines communicate anything. And it was maddening. I remember that I was crying. And my mom came to me and said, well, here, just do this. And she just drew a fox. And she wasn't an artist or anything, but to me, that was just magic. And I don't know why, but that just triggered in me this immense fascination with creating images with lines.
That's awesome.
And I was so, and this is kind of my personality, narrow-minded at the time, that I just drew foxes for a long time. I thought foxes looked cool because I saw them drawn, and so I drew foxes. But later that branched out to more things, like being a kid. I drew dinosaurs. I loved dinosaurs, and I got fascinated with various other things. But I gravitated towards animals, and started just being really determined to be an artist, and I wanted to paint animals. Primarily wildlife. I loved the North American wildlife that I saw growing up, and also I was fascinated with predators. So I loved big cats and bears and things like that. So that was really the only career goal I ever had growing up. Little young forays into, I want to be a fighter pilot for a little while because I saw a cool movie with fighter jets, but nothing I ever really saw a pathway to except for art. then when I was 21 and just getting into going into college, my dad gave me some advice to find a career that's dependable, that'll make me some money. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, it's kind of time to get serious about life. I didn't know any professional artists at the time. So the concept was you can't make a living as an artist.
Right.
And so I thought, oh, well, architecture is kind of like art, right? So I decided, and they make money, right? So I decided I'm going to be an architect. So I went to college at BYU, Idaho, and started the pre-architecture program. In the curriculum, I could take some art classes as well, some painting, some drawing and painting classes, and I did from Leon Parson. And I was so inspired by him, by his work, and that I just felt like I wanted to be a part of that world, but I didn't really feel the permission to do it.
Yeah.
And then I went to the National Museum of Wildlife Art and saw Carl Rungus for the first time. And his paintings just blew me away. And I looked at him and I remember the words coming to my mind. I can't die not knowing whether I could have done this or not. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, this is what I was meant to do. And so, between that and, I was a little tentative about it. So I went and talked to Leon Parson as well. He was kind of a mentor to me through college. Yeah. The other faculty was great too and gave me a lot of good things as well. But I had a lot of time with him. And I was kind of like asking him for permission. Like, can I do this? Could this work?
Right.
And he said, well, what do you do? What do you do in your spare time? Do you draw house plans? I said, no, I paint. So he just kind of looked at me like, well. So between those two events, I realized I have to do this. And I went and talked to my wife. I prepared her. We were young, poor college students, and we didn't go out to eat very often, but I took her out to dinner and sat her down across the table from me. And I was ready to lay it on the line and kind of break her heart. I think I have to be an artist. Then her response just was so touching, and it was amazing. She said, she got tears in her eyes and said, that's what I wanted you to do. This is what I hoped for you. And even though she knew what we were up against, as far as the path forward is not easy. But she's been 100% supportive the whole way. And I wouldn't have done it without that, because she depended on me, from the very beginning. When we got married, our idea was the traditional family, that she was going to raise the children and I was going to go work and provide. And that was what we did from day one. Yeah. And so that meant a lot of working on farms, digging ditches, moving sprinkler pipes, stacking hay, working in a grocery store, doing home inspections for banks, door-to-door sales, all kinds of jobs. I had to do whatever it took to pay the bills until the art thing took off. Yeah. And it took quite a while. I got into galleries when I was in college, but I never started making a living until at least 7 years after I graduated college. Yeah. So that whole time was me working full time, or, sometimes 60 hours a week, and then coming home and finding the cracks in between that I could fill with painting, because I had to keep growing. Yeah. And it was tough. But I never saw an alternative. We never had a plan B. It was just, this is what we're doing, and I know how to make it work. I just have to be determined for long enough, and it'll work. And it did. And I attribute that to the support I get from my wife, the direction I got from my college professors and other people other artists that I've been able to learn from along the way. And to God, by the grace of God, I've been able to do what I love to do for a living. And it's priceless, that Family is the most important thing to me. And so I would never make my family suffer, not providing for them just because I wanted to do what I wanted to do for a living.
Yeah.
But aside from that, you spend, 40 hours a week for decades of your life working. So the ability to do something that you love during that time is just a huge blessing.
Yeah.
So, just that's kind of how it all came together. And later on, I started painting people more because I love painting people from life, and I couldn't get animals to hold still for me.
Right.
So I got into figurative art, and that's what I was for a long period of time. And then later on, I felt like I kind of missed the animals, and I didn't really provide a space in my career for landscapes. And so I found that I can paint people, I can paint animals, I can paint landscapes, and I can paint stories. I love narrative, and I love complex figurative work all together in Western art. And that's where it all comes together. And that's kind of my family heritage anyway. And so I have some knowledge about that, some history, some resources. And so for the past 7 years, I guess, I've been painting more Western work. And I really love that because it gives me an immense amount of flexibility. What kind of images, interior, exterior, people, animals, story, landscape. It's an endless variety for me. So I feel really blessed to be welcomed into that world, and to be accepted into the CA is a really big thing for me. I feel like I have a small brotherhood of kind of mentors and people that have a lot in common with me that I can learn from and have camaraderie with, and help propel my work forward into this genre that's really fascinating me at this time.
That's awesome, Alvin. Who are some of those artists that you're referring to that are kind of in this with you and helping you? What would you say? Well, maybe 2 or 3 that have been really influential to you.
Yeah. First of all, Grant Redden. He's been a friend of mine for a number of years.
He's a decent painter.
He's all right. Yeah. He's fantastic. The first time I saw his work was at the Wilcox Gallery in Jackson, and it was these sheep under this tree casting a shadow on the sheep, and just this beautiful interplay of light and landscape. And I saw that and I thought, who's this? How'd you get this Russian master painting in this gallery? And I got up close. That's an American or English name. And so that's when I learned who Grant Redden was and how close he was. He lives in or near Evanston, 3rd generation sheep rancher. And anyway, so he became a good friend of mine, and I run a lot of my designs by him to get his advice. A lot of us artists pass things around back and forth to each other, and he's been a great resource for that. And when I see his work, it just pushes me to try new things and go further. Let's see. Clark Kelly Price is another one that, his style of painting is not what I do, but his ability to have so much story in his work has really inspired me. He's also just a great guy. I love that man. And what he does push me to see a new level of storytelling. I really want to get more and more narrative into my work. And it's not to say illustration by itself, has been kind of rejected from the art world, for the fine art world for a long time.
Right.
But slowly they've been realizing, oh, wait a minute, this N.C. Wyeth guy was pretty dang good.
Right.
Ian Cornwell, Harvey Dunn, they're amazing artists. That's just
the golden age of illustration. Yeah.
What's that?
The golden age of illustration.
Yeah. They were, to me, some of the best artists America ever produced. And
I agree.
you don't have to tell story, but story doesn't exclude art from being fine art. If you look back in the old days, like even Michelangelo and Leonardo, they were illustrators. Basically, they were painting stories.
Yeah.
They were painting for a paycheck. They were commissioned to do their work. And somehow we got this idea that, if it's narrative or whatever, then it's not fine art, it's illustration. But that's because I think illustration became a product to be printed on things, and that seemed to cheapen it in a lot of people's minds. But the work itself is independent of that. Whether it's good or bad does not, to me, illustration doesn't take anything away from it. But anyway, I love putting that into my work. I don't think it devalues it at all. I think it gives it another dimension. And I think stories inspire people. And I really want to have a positive effect on the world with my work. There's nothing wrong with painting something that's just beautiful and makes you feel something when you look at it. But if you can tie that to a good story, something that inspires somebody to make positive changes in their life, or to remember something, or think about something bigger than themselves, I think that's an added bonus onto the work, and that to me is something to strive for. Yeah.
So you were saying that you have some family heritage in the Western lifestyle. What's that? Describe that a little bit.
Well, primarily, my grandpa was he worked for the Forest Service, and he was a rancher. And growing up, he came from a Czech-speaking home. His parents were immigrants from Czechoslovakia at the time, and he learned English as a second language. But early in his teen years, I think at the time, being an immigrant wasn't that highly thought of a thing, and he just wanted to be American. He just wanted to blend in. And I think in some ways that can be a good thing. In some ways it can be a bad thing. But with him, it was just, he fell in love with the whole American cowboy ethos, and he got jobs riding range and being a cowboy. And he was a legit cowboy for the time that he lived in, to the degree that you could be at that time. And he was just an amazing man, really hardworking. And I really enjoy the stories I've heard about him from my dad. And his life was really exemplary. And he fought in World War II, came back, was kind of cowboying around again, and then got married and got serious about life. And him and my grandma homesteaded and developed this sagebrush lot or piece of land into a beautiful ranch. That was his main deal. He worked for the Forest Service some as well, but so my dad was raised on a ranch, and we, as a kid, we had cattle, but it wasn't a working ranch. We had really, really big pets. They were registered polled Herefords that we'd teach them how to lead, and we'd take, like I was at like 12 years old, I could lead our herd bull around an arena with a show stick and make him stand just the way I wanted to, and scratch his chin, And so that's the kind of cattle we had. But my uncle's family they kind of inherited the ranch side of things. And I learned how to ride over there at my grandpa's place and did some work with the cattle there. I was never a cowboy per se, but I've always loved horses and always been around that lifestyle. And I think it's a beautiful thing and a beautiful piece of history that has formed some of the great things about our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. That's really neat that you have that heritage. When you were talking about when you were getting started and how you were doing all this other side jobs, whatever it was, door-to-door sales, working at the grocery store, like pretty much just whatever it took for you to make ends meet, and you were fitting in the painting. Describe that kind of in more depth. I just want to hear some of how did you make that work? What did that look like? Sometimes the how is in the reason.
People like to say in the why, but that's not proper English. It's the reason. But I'm sorry. It's one of my pet peeves. But if you have a reason, if you have a determination, you go after it and you find a how. You find a way to make things happen. And it just looked different everywhere I lived. Every job I had, it looked different. But so there, for example, I had at one point, I didn't have a full-time job. I had like 5 part-time jobs. I was delivering pizza for 2 different places. I had a door-to-door sales job that I could, choose what time I wanted to spend doing that. I was moving sprinkler pipe for a farmer. Is that 5? I don't know. But it was, and it was about that time. They kind of overlap some, but I had night security as well. So There's new construction going on, and I had to make the rounds on these buildings that were getting worked on to make sure there wasn't anybody dinking around in there, wasn't any fires or anything like that. So that looked different because half my night was gone.
Yeah.
And, when I had a grocery store job, I had a set schedule, and I would almost every day I would paint. But on the weekends, Saturday was, when I was working the regular 9 to 5 type jobs, Saturday was painting. And when I would come home from work, I would try to spend adequate time with the kids, but that was really kind of the only distraction I allowed myself. And my wife was really helpful in making sure that those things were taken care of enough that I didn't have to put out fires. And she was really tolerant of the time I had to spend behind the easel, but I would just come home and just find the time. In a way, it was easy because I was at work just wishing I was painting. Yeah. And so when I got home, it was like, oh, good, I can paint now. It wasn't like, I'm tired, I don't want to paint. That almost never happened. That only happens now.
Right.
I love what I do, but if you do it 60 hours a week, then you're like, okay, I got a deadline to meet. I got to keep plugging away. But back then it was just a joy to find that time.
Yeah.
But a huge part of it was that was before smartphones, and there weren't any invasive distractions. You had to be in a bad habit to have distractions. Yeah. So I just didn't have anything but my family and my jobs and my painting, and that's it. And it was, so that's why it worked. I hope that I could say that it would have worked if I was distracted with Instagram and all that garbage that we have to fight off now, but I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah. As I look back on my career and how it started and all that, and, I was a full-time teacher and it was nights and weekends. And then during the summer breaks when I had that freedom to just paint, and my wife was extremely supportive, but it got to a point where, at least from my side of things, that lifestyle, as the art career started to take off and to do well, it just became so much. It was almost like 2 full-time jobs at that point. And that was challenging, and it wasn't the kind of lifestyle that we could maintain. The money was great. I'm getting the salary from teaching, and then I'm making everything else with the painting, and but it just got to the point where something had to give, and luckily the art was ready to take over. Yeah. But yeah, like I don't see how you or I could have done it without that support from the wife. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
The only alternative was to abandon your family responsibilities and, or abandon the art. And neither one of those are acceptable in my mind. So yeah, luckily she was there to support the art because I wasn't going to abandon my family. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Along those lines, I kind of missed something in my history. I had a very similar experience when I was teaching at BYU, Idaho. I was teaching for about 5.5 years, and it was sort of intensive, but only for about 20 hours a week. Yeah. And I could spend quite a bit of time painting at home. And it got to the point where I was selling enough that I had to start turning down commissions and opportunities that I knew would pay off because I had to teach.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was an easy decision for me to just stop teaching. You're giving up some security, but, I've had insecurity my whole painting career. So it wasn't that big of a deal. It was kind of a no-brainer. And that's how, if people are looking for advice on what to do, it depends on kind of how you're geared. I know some people are okay with just jumping off a cliff and being like, how deep is this water going to be when I hit?
Right.
But if you have dependents, I think you owe it to them to make sure that it works. And so I would suggest that you have a pretty good idea that it's the painting career builds up enough that you can say, okay, this is logical. I can drop this full-time or this part-time job over here.
Yeah.
But if you're by yourself, and you don't mind living on people's couches or whatever the case is, then you might be able to just go to heck with it. I don't need anything other than painting, and I only need $1,000 a month to survive or whatever. So here we go.
Yeah.
But providing for dependents is a sacred responsibility that I think we ought to take very seriously. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think I could have quit teaching probably 2 or 3 years before I did. Just as I look back on the numbers from what I was making as a painter, but I wanted to see that track record and that trajectory. Every year it was getting better and better, and it was consistent enough for 3-4 years that it just made absolute sense for us to make that transition. And I feel very, very similar. Like I had, let's see, it was in 2018, and I think let's see, how old is, so we had 4 kids at that point, and so it was like, yeah, I got to make sure that this is legit before I just take this leap. So, and to throw away a salaried position, that does provide some security and benefits, that's a pretty stiff cliff to let go of, and yeah. Oh, I totally get it. But hat off to you, man, for that. And so let's shift gears a little bit. You talked about how you were really into wildlife for a little bit, landscape, figurative. How has, at least in the last maybe since you went full time, I don't know, how has your work shifted, transitioned, and developed over the last few years?
Well, okay, probably the biggest change in the past few years has been just shifting away from too much dependence on references, photo references. And you have to earn that. I mean, I've seen people who try to make stuff up and they don't quite get the light thing. They don't understand landscape color. They don't understand the figure well enough or whatever. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect at any of those, but my level of competency finally hit a point where I can change figures and change landscapes or invent them from whole cloth in a painting to support the main element.
Okay.
And so, it's not, I know my work has changed in what I'm doing, the complexity and whatnot, but I think that is a byproduct of that process of deciding that design and the design and the idea and the story are paramount. They're the first thing. And so I'll start with a little sketch that kind of encapsulates the message, something really, really simple. And then I'll go, okay, what does this need to support it? And whatever reference material I can get from hiring a model and getting a costume and whatever I'll get. But I won't let a lack of perfect reference material make me not paint what I want to paint.
Yeah.
I found ways to obscure things and to change and invent that has helped me to create what I want to create. And that's been very freeing, because for a lot of my career, it was, I would buy rights to a photograph to paint from that. I would spend so much time getting the perfect reference set up, and I would turn down painting ideas that came to mind because I couldn't get the quite the right reference for them.
Yeah.
Things like that. I'm not really stuck by those things anymore.
That's awesome.
It's been really freeing. And part of it is also allowing certain imperfections in my work that I didn't allow before, and realizing that a lot of those imperfections aren't necessarily a weakness in the work, because the most important things are there. And that stuff can just, I've looked at, like, my favorite artist of all time, I guess I would have to say, is Nikolai Feshin. And looking at a lot of his work, there's so many times when I look at something and go, man, that's distorted, or that's obscure, or that doesn't quite make sense, but I don't care. It's just amazing. It's just beautiful, because the things that I really want to look at, that I really care about, are there and they're solid. And any viewer that falls in love with something about, not any viewer, I guess, but this is how I look at it. If I fall in love with something about a painting, there are a lot of other little things that don't need to be perfect in the painting, because they nailed something that just captivates me. And that's what I'm trying to do, is nail that thing and let everything else be as obscure, the supporting elements be as obscure as they can be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I taught a workshop this last week, and I was just demonstrating a pretty simple, grizzly bear portrait. But when I know this is different, I don't have nearly the narrative and the complexity in a lot of my work that you do, but I nail that focal point. There's certain aspects of a portrait that just have to be solid, like the eyes, the snout, any kind of, real distinct anatomy is essential. If it's wrong, it's going to look wrong, and then it won't resonate. It'll just seem odd. Mm-hmm. And then, for me, it's like, I got to sell this. And if some of those things are off, people won't want to buy it ultimately. Yeah. And so there's certain things where it's like, I have to nail this, but everything else outside of that, there's a lot of right ways to make that happen.
Right.
And so it sounds like I really resonate with what you said there, because there are certain things that are they're non-negotiables. We got to make sure that where you've got very specific anatomy, especially when it comes to, I would think, human anatomy, portraits, faces, things like that. You got to make sure that those are, at least not distracting. Right. They're right enough that it's not bothersome. Mm-hmm. But then, there's a lot of freedom and leeway to let some things happen and kind of discover what the solution might be in that process of actually painting. And I think that's one of the funnest things about painting, is getting to that point where it's like, I can start to play around with and discover the rest of the painting as I go. I don't know. Do you find that to be similar with what you're doing?
Absolutely. There's a point in the painting where you realize, okay, I got it. I nailed it. I got what I need to get. Yeah. Now let's see what happens with the rest of this stuff. Yeah. And then you can just play, because you get the confidence that you can fix whatever you mess up. You can scrape it. You can paint over it, especially, being an oil painter, just endless ways you can change and correct things. But what you were saying, that brought to mind a kind of an idea that I've always had, but I've never really put it into words before. I think in the beginning of somebody's painting journey, they need to learn there's a million ways to do it wrong. And then, but later on, you need to learn, but there's 1,000 ways to do it right.
Yeah.
So at first you're gonna get some dogmatic viewpoints of, this is how you paint. This is how you communicate light. This is how you show perspective. This is what anatomy looks like. You got to learn all those things, and you'll feel like there's only one right way to do it, and there's a million wrong ways to do it. And you kind of have to do that because you got to take whatever resources you have and learn from them very thoroughly.
Yeah.
But when you get that knowledge, when you own it, and you can start bending it and creating with it rather than just copying it, then you can realize, hey, even though there's a million ways to do things wrong, there's also 1,000 ways to do things right. So if I kind of start experimenting with those different options, then I can find, I'll inevitably find some unique way to express what I feel or what I'm trying to portray that isn't exactly like anybody else, but is just as valid as anybody else. It's not because this figure, their femurs are too short, so it looks jacked up. It's, I decided to obscure these things to unify them into one value shape because I know that I can get away with it. You know what you can get away with.
Yeah.
And that's a great discovery, because when you can get away with things, you have your own shorthand and people look at it and go, I don't know why that works, but it just does. And creating that mystery is a beautiful thing.
So I keep thinking of the word abstraction as we're talking here. To me, I find a lot of interest and excitement around, especially as you get close to a painting, kind of the abstract nature of, optical mixture, different ways to layer paint and create texture and suggesting form rather than, going in with a fine brush and defining everything. How do you feel like you balance between realism and abstraction in your work?
Yeah. You probably have a pretty sophisticated audience, but I think it's first it's important to get the word abstract and abstraction kind of pinned down. Yeah. People think abstract art means art that doesn't look like anything, but to abstract is to take from, and that's what you're talking about, is when you take something from reality, you distill it down into something else. That's abstraction.
Okay. I like that.
And there's, it's funny because as soon as you start understanding a medium, like, okay, when I was drawing foxes, the line became a valid form of abstraction. I understood that I was outlining a shape and making it look like a fox. And if you look at the reality of the situation, this is a graphite line on paper. It has nothing to do with a fox. Even if I put all the shading and everything into it and made the optical illusion of a fox, it would still be graphite on paper. But somehow our brains understand that this pattern that's related to what comes to our eyes when we see an actual fox, that there's that likeness that people will look at and go, that looks so real, because we've accepted that as an accurate representation of reality. And when you start stepping outside of what looks like a photograph, because most of us, all of us have been raised with endless photos and videos of things.
Right.
And so we take the camera recording nature in its way as akin to reality when it's really not.
Right.
But we all start from that point. And when you start from that point, start finding your way into, how do I simplify this, or how do I make this? And in most cases, I think it's making it quicker. Like I'm doing a plein air painting. This effect of light with this cloud passing over and all this, it's going to last 10 minutes. So I've got to get that in my head and put it down. I don't have time to dink around, but I have to get the essentials to where it's capturing what I want to capture. And that in itself is probably the best way to learn to abstract things, is when you have some kind of a pressure or limitation that makes you have to push beyond what you've learned or what people generally understand to communicate something that's too big for you to copy literally in the every pixel makes sense kind of a way.
Yeah. Every little detail and nuance.
Yeah. And there's, you can strategize with that. Like I love creating a texture and knowing that I'm going to come over it later when the paint's sticky with another layer of paint that has a certain consistency to it, that if I drag it just right, it'll create an effect an effective texture that will look like, leaves on a tree or fur on an animal or whatever, in just the right way. And then if that doesn't quite look right, I know that later I can come over with a glaze and unify it or tone it down, or I can scrape it a certain way. I love being able to manipulate paint and, like you say, to abstract things from the sense of getting it all right to, let's see what this does. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's scrape it and let's see what this does. And that didn't work, the layering process. I love it. It's a fun game to play. And I think a lot of admirable artists that do this, that just get every little thing with a small brush, that's okay. I'm not disparaging that. I just don't enjoy that game.
Yeah.
I enjoy the game of strategizing technique and materials to see what kind of effects you can get to create what kind of illusions and how many different ways you can do that. It's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I just geek out on all of that. Just talking about this, I just start thinking about, and honestly, I think it comes down to, it's like, how can I make this look believable in a bizarre way? And not that I'm always looking to be bizarre, but it's like, I want to see what happens. And then if it works, it works.
Yeah.
And there's that freedom to allow that to remain, as long as it's reading, the way that it needs to, just to describe whatever it is you're describing in that part of the painting.
Yeah. And, what we do is entertain. We're trying to entertain people with our pictures, but also we have to entertain ourselves, because you can't do the same thing over and over again. You'll go crazy. Yeah. So you develop new ways of doing things, shorthand, if you want to call it that, new techniques, because we have to enjoy what we do. And if I'm strategizing to try to figure out how do we get that effective light by dragging paint or by glazing or by scraping or whatever, that's a lot more fun than doing it the same old way every time. So we inevitably develop new ways to do things when we're trying to keep ourselves entertained while we're creating things that will communicate to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So I'm going to shift gears again. You've had a pretty formal education, and you attribute a lot of your, at least foundational skills and things like that, to your time at BYU Idaho, and learning from some of those professors. And you've also taught as an adjunct professor. What is your perspective as a professional artist? How essential is it to have a formal education as an artist? And is it something that you would recommend to somebody who's just getting started?
There are a couple of facets to that I've thought long and hard about. There are things that the university, I'll just go there first, that the university atmosphere, or let's just say the university has to offer, that you can't get anywhere else.
And you're talking about university in general, any kind of art program that's beyond high school. At an accredited school of any kind, right? Yeah. Okay.
So in some ways, I felt like I wasted a lot of time and money going through the whole getting my degree process. But in other ways, I feel like I had some experiences and I met people and developed in a way all because of that environment that I was in. Yeah. So you need to look at, first of all, the academic art education is different than the accredited university graduation requirements that everybody has to have this much math and English and humanities and whatever. But I went that route. I got a formal degree, And I feel like I can pretty safely say that if I hadn't done that and I had spend the same amount of time going to ateliers, studying from doing just art, art classes, I would have improved faster for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't, so I think that would be, if you're just trying to say, okay, you know what you want to do, you're going to be an artist, nothing else. You probably ought to go that route. But if you, like, for example, you need to live in a certain place and those ateliers aren't accessible for where you live, or whatever the case may be, then there are a lot of universities that have, well, not a lot. There are a few universities that have some good art programs that teach you actually how to paint. And you need to, I think people need to screen those really well. Like, what kind of work do I want to create? And does the faculty here support that, both in their ideals and the work that they produce, their capabilities? But yes, I think education, you can't just, I've seen very, very few exceptions. No, I don't know if I've seen any exceptions of people that didn't need some kind of formal education. The self-taught painters look like self-taught painters. And there are a lot of people who are very good artists that call themselves self-taught because they mean something different than I do when I say it. They went to workshops. They studied the books of the masters. They did master copies. They learned the processes. They painted from life, all that stuff. That is the education. And so just because you didn't get a degree or have a specific mentor or whatever doesn't mean you're self-taught. The people I'm talking about, that if you try to skip the education side of it and you just you try to learn without critiques or without classes or without studying the figure or studying composition, you're going to suffer. Your work is not going to get where you want it to go. That is if they're after what you and I value.
Yeah.
Traditional representational art, the ability to communicate through the use of figures and landscapes and things like that communicate actual physical things in the world. And so, I think that type of education is extremely valuable. I still try to pursue that. I just went to I only was able to go to one day, but I went to a sculpting workshop, because I want to eventually get into sculpture as well. I've taken classes on that, but always trying to develop and learn. I'm doing plein air painting. I'm painting from models whenever I can, because those things are endless learning opportunities that will refine you. Yeah. And if you don't do that, you're going to be lacking. It's going to show. And so get that done as early as you can in your career. Just focus on developing.
Yeah. So I feel very similar in my perspective from the university standpoint. And, I think that for me, it was so important. I had this idea, I have to get a degree, and fortunately, as a teacher, when I went into teaching, I got a BFA in illustration and then a Bachelor of Science in Art Education at BYU, Idaho as well. And to me, I had kind of that drilled in my head, you had to get a degree. Otherwise, you can't get a job. But as an artist, I feel like hands down, having that fundamental foundation of composition, design, drawing skill, painting skill, those things that you can learn at the university are going to be way more essential than a piece of paper hanging on the wall.
Absolutely.
And I think, as I look at how things are shifting in the world, especially, I feel like there's so many, art programs. It's like they're dropping like flies, that were any kind of traditional foundational approach like what you and I received. It's getting fewer and farther between.
Yeah.
and it's encouraging to see some programs that are thriving, but it's kind of like this lost world of of traditional art, and it seems to be fading, and it's to me it's sad and scary. But I think, if you want to pursue that, there's a lot of other ways to do it besides the university setting. But I think you're right. It has to be founded in those basics, those fundamentals of approaching, things from life, and learning from other artists. And I think workshops are such a great resource nowadays, and even more so, that's so much more available. You have all these online resources with artists that are teaching workshops or courses that are pre-recorded and whatever. There's a lot of ways to develop those skills. So
yeah, there's no excuse. Some people don't know where to go, but just listen to someone like you for probably every podcast. They get enough information to get themselves on the right track. But there's so many resources out there. And, just the online stuff it's mind-boggling how far we've come. You can get an atelier experience just at home. Now, there's nothing takes the place of hands-on with the professor, or with an artist mentor or whatever, with the model in front of you, on the spot critiques. That's the best by far.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
If you can't do that, you can get a pretty decent approach to it online, just by using the resources that are available. But you have to have that. You can't skip that. There's one of my professors. It's actually a sculpting professor, Matt Geddes at BYU Idaho.
Yeah.
Told this funny story. This kid that came in, and he had some kind of advanced sculpture class in high school or something like that, and so they were the class that. The intro to sculpture or whatever that was being taught was experimenting with different things, trying different, just kind of getting an idea of different areas of sculpture. So one of the things they did was they sculpted somebody from life. And this one kid came to Matt and said, I've done my figure study before, so I can skip this assignment, right? And just like, it was mind blowing to hear something like that. Like, you think because you've done this once that you don't need it anymore? It's like, how many thousands of paintings have I done, of a model sitting in front of me, or a landscape? Sometimes there'll be like a little 10-minute sketch, and sometimes I'll work on one for 3 hours, but you're trying to understand so that you can use that understanding to create. And if you don't get that understanding, you have nothing to communicate. You have nothing to say. It's asinine that people would want to skip that. You've got to find, to me, the goal of the art education is to find the best way to understand the medium or the world that you're trying to interpret, because you can't interpret something until you understand it, or communicate what you're interpreting. I'm not sure if those words make as much sense as I would like them to, but I think you understand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like doing something once, you're going to learn from that, definitely. But to think that that's the extent of it, it really is comical and absurd.
Yeah.
To assume that, like, oh yeah, I've done this before, like, let's move on to the next thing.
Right.
But it's interesting as I look back on my education, there were always kind of, and I think I even fell into that at times. It's like, oh, I've done this before. Like, we're good. Like, I understand. I got this,
Yeah.
But if you want to go to a level, especially as a professional, to me, it's almost like every aspect of education is putting a deposit into this bank account of knowledge and understanding that we can draw from for the rest of our lives. And we've got the beauty is that every time we're practicing, we're making deposits into that bank account. Mm-hmm. And as you get older and more developed and you pursue the art further and further into life, it's like we just have a lot more depth to reach from than somebody who's just been doing it for a year or two, or even a month or two, depending on the situation. All education is valuable, but it all comes with a price. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I want to have a really, really massive wealth in that account that I can draw from for the rest of my life.
Right.
For sure.
The pinnacle of success to me as an artist is being able to just have an idea and just go and just create it, just like I want to create this, boom, and I'm starting to understand what that can be like. I've had little windows of little projects I've done where I felt like I kind of sort of did that. I'm kind of on the path to get there. How cool would it be to have the figure so well in your mind and understand light so well in your mind that not that you don't want to lose contact with nature. It's good to just depict nature sometimes, but to just be able to go, man, I want to paint this and just paint it because it's all in there. It's all inside. You understand it. And so the lifetime of gaining that understanding little by little is so super important. It's an account. You're right. It's just like you're a multimillionaire in your brain. You've got all that material sitting there that can aid you in so many different directions with your artistic endeavors because you've beaten it into your head. Yeah. Super important.
As you're talking and as this conversation is developing, I just think about how important it is that you never lose sight of that aspect of painting. Yeah. That you have to always be learning and you always have to be growing. And yeah, even though at this point in my career, I don't feel like I can paint a beautiful, realistic portrait of a grizzly bear without reference. In fact, I think I would flop horribly if I didn't have some really great reference. But I think that I could get a start. And then if I had some reference that I could then look at to kind of fill in some of the gaps, I think I could be kind of successful at that.
Yeah.
And so as you're moving into this area of work where you're able to invent a lot more and things like that, how often are you looking at reference to just kind of supplement what you're doing? I'm curious.
Well, at this point, I always have some form of reference.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes I'll have a reference that doesn't look anything like what I'm painting.
Yeah.
Just has that little thing that I needed. And like, for example, I took a film still watching a movie and just screenshot it because I love the color palette and the overall design, the value shapes of it. And you kind of could tell what was going on, but it was so dark you couldn't really tell. But I took that and I just put it away for a while. And later on, I came back to it. I kept actually going back to it and thinking, man, I got to paint that someday, but I'm not sure how. And then when I hit the point where I've done this a few times where I've made up enough, I looked at that and used that as my only reference to paint this big painting until I got to some sticking points where I was kind of inventing this horse that was in a different pose than the horse you could barely see in the smoky screenshot.
Yeah. And
I saw, okay, I'll just take this as far as I can from my mind. And then when I need help, I'll go to reference. So I'll dig through my photo references of somebody running on a horse until I find, okay, that's the shoulder information that I'm missing, that I don't quite know well enough. And I'll look at that shoulder and reconstruct my painting a little bit. And I'll do the same thing for the head and maybe for the bridle or whatever. And so I'll use reference to sometimes just to fill in gaps, but I'll always use reference. And there are still paintings where most of the reference is just what I need. That's the easiest way to do a painting. Yeah. And so if I can do that and it's very clear in my mind what I need, I'm not going to avoid getting what I need. I'll just not allow my inability to get perfect reference to hold me back from doing a painting I want to do. So that's kind of how does that answer your question? Well,
yeah, I like that. Where, for me, it's, I'm looking at this reference on this portrait, and I'm like, I get all the things I need, and then I'm trying to be like, okay, how can I diverge from my reference to make this mine and unique, and allow my voice to start to speak. But it's still like I'm starting with that reference and trying to move away from that. Whereas you're moving from, like, you have this idea, this composition, and I'm assuming probably these little sketches that you're doing to develop that. And then you're, when you need it, like, okay, this is where I'm lacking, and you have the ability to see, I've got this gap here where it's just not coming together like it ought to for the strength of and the integrity of the painting. I need to have something else that's going to help to beef that up. That's beyond what I can currently come up with. I think that's a really neat approach. That's pretty fascinating.
I can show you something real quick that might illustrate that a bit.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
I'm doing a painting of Stephen Austin, who was one of the primary founders of Texas. So he led. He got a contract with the Mexican government before Texas was before they seceded from Mexico, and so he went down there and settled. He got the. It's called what's it called? The 300. Anyway, Stephen Austin and the 300. So I'm illustrating that story kind of a painting of Stephen Austin. So I just did this sketch thinking, okay, I want a regal looking situation of, a guy on a horse coming into a valley with covered wagons behind him and showing a little bit of the landscape on the side. Yeah. And I felt good about that image. And so at that point I thought, okay, what do I need to do to make this work? So I went out and got on a horse, had photos shot of me going through this scenario a few times, and bringing that horse into the painting and changing it so it looked, because I didn't get the reference that I wanted, but it was good enough to blend between this sketch and the photos I had. Yeah. And these wagons back here, I'm just kind of making them up. In the landscape, I'm making it up. But I know that I can find the color of grass in my mind and in photo references to just make that all happen. Yeah. And so I'm on the horse in the photos I have. I'm on the horse, and I'm not wearing the right clothing. But there is a portrait of Stephen Austin. And so I'm just using that portrait and me on a horse to paint Stephen Austin on a horse, even though I don't look at all like Stephen Austin. I'm not even wearing the right clothes. My horse isn't in the right pose, but all that, I'm able to manipulate all that to come together and work right.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Very fun. So let's dive in. I think this is a great segue into your process. Give us some more, like, it sounds like you start with like a pencil sketch. Is that typical?
Yeah. But getting to that is the hardest part. So, getting an idea to me is really hard. And I thought I was uniquely, weak at that, but, I've read other artists' biographies that have taught me otherwise. Even, Norman Rockwell. So he seems like the guy with endless ideas, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a book that I love called Rockwell on Rockwell, How I Create a Picture, or something to that effect. And he wrote the book, and it's about his process. And when he talks about the idea phase, this is kind of what I follow. he says he settles into his studio and prepares for battle and just like shuts everything out and decides that he is going to come away with an idea if it kills him. And he'll start, you have to start somewhere or you just get stymied from the beginning. And he said he would always start by drawing a lamppost. And then he'd say, okay, what do I do with this? So he'll do like some guy leaning against the lamppost. Well, who is this guy? Maybe he's a sailor. And what else? Okay, what else? You got a dog in front of him. And so he'll do that just to start things happening. And eventually he'll come up with an idea, like after hundreds of little tiny drawings that only he can make sense of. They don't have to be pretty. He just has to be able to look at them and go, oh, I know what that is. And after hundreds of those, he comes up with something that he feels excited about, a picture he can create. Wow. I kind of follow that process a bit. But I am not always, it's not always that process. Sometimes I need some inspiration. So I'll look through my art books and find an image, a painting that I love. And I'll go, how can I get, if I'm really excited about that image, how can I get whatever it is that makes me excited about this into a painting? Yeah. And so it might be a landscape with some figures at work in a field, but I might end up turning it into, a scene with cowboys pushing cattle, something like that. Usually it's a visual element, a design aspect that I'm in love with, or a communication of light that I love. And that will start my idea. So it could be from the sketches. It could be from just looking at other artists' work, but then I'll get a sketch and go, okay, this is going to be how I'm going to get those elements into something. And then I'll I'll let it develop into what I need it to be to make it an actual paintable painting. That to me is by far the hardest part of the process. And it's also the most satisfying because I feel like I've slain a dragon when I get to that point. It's tough. Awesome. But when I have an idea I'm excited about with a design, meaning grouped value shapes, organized, then I feel like it's all downhill from there. So then I'll get my, I'll decide what kind of reference I need, who to use for my models, what kind of costumes to use, and do photo shoots if I need to. If not, I'll dig through my files and go, hey, I already have this stuff. I'll just use these photos I have to work. If there's something I don't understand about light, like for example, I did one of a guy roping a calf in a corral, and I didn't understand the way light worked on the kind of the muddy manure stuff in the corral that had dried up from the sun. So I went over to a neighbor's place that had a corral that had lots of cattle and horses in it over time, on a bright sunny day. And I did a little painting of that corral so I could understand how light was working there. And I used that as reference. So it's basically just knowing what you don't know. So once you know what you don't know, you know where to get it. Yeah. And to fill in the cracks.
Well, that's, you're being resourceful. You know what your limitations are, and you're filling in those gaps, and you find a way to make that possible. And, I would imagine that you could probably, scour through some old Western paintings and find a corral somewhere, and see how another artist might have handled it.
Yeah.
But yeah, going to a real life source and either taking pictures or doing a little study, that's pretty cool. That's very, very important.
And it's fun too. It's like, when I'm in the middle of a stumbling block on a painting, it's just fun to have an excuse to just go do a plein air painting. Like this is legit work. I'm working right now. Yeah. But I'm just painting manure with sunlight and shade on it. It's just, and part of the fun is the strategy. Like I figured out how to solve this problem, and there's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from that. And I love it. It's so much more exciting than just like reproducing this perfect thing I have. It's like, how do I solve this problem? It's fun. I enjoy it.
So did you tell your wife that I'm going to go paint some animal dung or fecal matter, and we could say, I'm going to go paint a pile of shit.
No, that time she was actually out of the house, but there's something funny along those lines though. There's a farm. There's this really cool barn I went to paint just because I loved the barn. I did this little plein air painting of it, and the owner came by and they loved it, and they said they'd really like that painting. And I remembered that we were in the middle of revamping our garden, and we needed a lot of compost. Yeah. So I traded a truckload of crap for a painting. I'm kind of a dad joke guy, I guess. And I came home and I was telling my wife about that. I said, yeah, I was over painting this barn and the farmer came by and gave me a bunch of crap for the painting, So, but yeah, it's funny how that tied into to an actual experience, but yeah,
that's hilarious.
That's another fun aspect of it too. You get to know people, you get to have valuable experiences like that. Like, who knows who you're going to run into? But if I'm in the studio, just like, I know who I'm going to run into. Nobody.
Right.
And there was a time when I was just out painting a field, and as I was painting, I was frustrated because the light was changing, and I realized why the light was changing, because there was this really awesome looking storm coming in where you could see the cell, you could see the rainfall like a column just coming toward me. And I got nailed by that storm. But in the process, I got this beautiful little study that I loved it. And some of it, I only captured some of it, but I remembered enough that I came home and, while it was raining outside, and finished it in my studio. And that experience, you can't trade that for anything. There's no way to experience stuff like that except for experiencing it. And you just miss out on life if you don't get out there and have these problem solving and nature experiencing opportunities. So I love it. That's another aspect of what I do that I just absolutely love. Yeah,
that's cool. You talked about trading manure for a painting, and I've found myself being able to trade, I've traded dental work for art, different things here and there, value toward a vehicle with a painting or something like that. And
cool. I haven't done that yet. That'd be cool.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet when that can work out. But there's always this aspect, especially as you and I are providing for a family. How do you market yourself? I think having the skill, being able to create beautiful art, that's absolutely essential. But then there's this whole other world and aspect of selling it and marketing it and getting it on people's walls when they've paid you for it. How does that come into your career, and maybe some tidbits of advice, how to get it in front of the right people?
That's a really good question. And I've been asked that a lot, because, that was probably the number one question I had coming up as an artist, looking forward to the time where I could pay the bills with my paintings. And I have either the best or the worst answer for it. And it depends on who you are, I guess. But I am the worst person to ask that question if you want a business strategy. I don't have any organized method of getting work. But what I have learned is it's all about relationships. Because, it's all about skills and relationships. Yeah. If your work is good enough that people can't ignore it, then you're going to sell your work. That is, to me, that's always been important. And I used to believe that was the only thing I needed. And maybe it was because I didn't want to pay attention to the business side of things, but for whatever reason, I didn't pay attention. I didn't develop a business strategy. I just wanted to be really good.
Yeah.
And I can say that has helped me a lot.
Well, and there's some point too, even you might paint beautifully, but until you put it in front of somebody else, it never has the potential to sell.
Right.
So there is at least that, I've met several artists that I'm like, I don't know where you've been and like where your work has come from, but this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I don't know who the heck you are, and it's just like, they don't put themselves out there.
And I might be kind of one of those that is just, I've been around long enough that you just kind of, I've grown out of that just by being around long enough, I think, because I've gotten that comment before. And I really don't have a business strategy. When I was in college, I got into galleries early on because I knew, okay, you got to get into galleries. Yeah. So I went out and presented my stuff to some galleries and got in a couple of them. But there are some tricks to everything, but I didn't have any magical way to do it. I just tried to be respectful and went into them and, to see if they were interested in my work. Now, having done that a few times, I could have some suggestions to help people along the way, but nothing that would be life-changing. And most of the work I get through commissions is just somebody contacting me that I don't know them from Adam, but they know about me somehow. And a lot of them I've asked because I want to learn about that. Like, where'd you hear about me? Oh, just on the internet. Like, what does that even mean? Like, how do I make sense of that? How do I duplicate that? I can't. Or word of mouth. That's probably word of mouth. And they just found my work somewhere, happenstance. But I think that a lot of work I've gotten is from repeat customers and from people who have talked to people that I've worked with that like my work and they know me as a person or something. Yeah. But I know that the people that I have done the most business with, I've developed relationships with. Collectors, a lot of collectors aren't just one-offers. They're not just going to buy a painting. They're going to love what you do enough to keep coming back for more. And if you try to just be totally real with them and not try to, don't make them feel like you're trying to sell to them or that they're just an avenue of money for you. You just enjoy them, enjoy the people that they are, and don't pretend like you're something that you're not, and try to foster those meaningful interactions, email them every once in a while, things like that. That's really all I do. And if I hear about a show that everybody says I should be in, then I'll go, okay, how do I apply to that show? And so I'll apply to it. But I don't have a plan, and it's probably shot myself in the foot by that. Maybe my career could be more developed or earlier on or whatever, but I don't. Like, for example, with you, Mark, you told me about the Out West Art Show. Yeah. And you said it was really good. It got you a good portion of your annual income. And so I thought, okay, well, good. I could use more sales. So I know Mark knows what he's doing and he's had experience here. So I'm going to apply to that show. So I did, and I got in, and it's been a good source of income for me. And at that show, I met a lot of people that I've done business with since. And so I was just there and I talked to people, and to me, there's not much strategy in that. Maybe there's more, maybe there could be more, but to me, there hasn't been. It's just like, oh, I met them at that show and they like me, so I'm doing business with them. Yeah. So I guess just get out there.
Yeah. And that's kind of the gist I'm kind of coming to as you're talking is get out there, try stuff, get in front of people and make connections and relationships. And I think, I was talking with a lot of these aspiring and emerging artists at this workshop that I was teaching last week. And that came up as well. It's who knows you and who likes you. Yeah. And I think in any business, as long as you're not a jerk, and you're pleasant to be around, people are going to gravitate to you, especially if your work is worthwhile and good enough that you can't really ignore it. And so to me, it's like, who knows you and who likes you. And if you have those things going for you and you start to reach out into, maybe you apply for this new show or whatever, and you haven't burned bridges by the way you've treated other people, and your work is decent, there's a good chance you're going to get in and you'll have that opportunity to further that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's very few people are awkward enough that they can't just be themselves and have people like them. I think most of us, if we just relax and talk to people at these art shows or whatever, they're going to enjoy getting to meet you. They're going to enjoy the fact that they know the person behind this work and there's something that interests them about you that you can't put your finger on because you're just you. Like, I don't think there's anything interesting about me because I look at myself in the mirror every day.
Right.
But when someone else who's not used to me gets to know me, maybe there's something interesting about me that I don't know. But I think that's how you just be real with people and try to relax and have a good conversation, especially if it's somebody who's wealthy or that gets treated like they're a source of money to other artists, If they go around you and they don't get that feeling of, oh, he's after a sale or he's making me feel like I'm special because he wants money from me, then they're going to like you just default just because of that, Yeah. Because I've known some very famous people in my life and I'm good friends with a couple of them. And I can tell by their interactions with me and with other people that it's a really big breath of fresh air to them when somebody treats them like they're just their neighbor.
Yeah.
They don't want to be treated like, well, I guess there's some narcissists out there that like to be treated like they're special, but most people don't. They just want to be one of the guys. And especially if somebody's in an art show, they're looking at paintings and thinking about buying paintings, it's because they love art. Yeah. And if they love art, they're interested in the artists because what we do is mysterious to them. And so if they can get to know you, they're like, it's this cool mystery that they solved and this little connection they have now. So it's kind of free. It's like free business right there, just be a person, be nice, treat people like humans. I don't know. And I'm sure a lot of people that watch this podcast will be going like, man, I wanted to write down notes and say, okay, you can do step A, step B, step C. Yes, I wish I could give you that, but I can't. But maybe this is the best answer for some of you. Yeah. It has been for me because it's so freeing. I go to art shows and I don't feel the pressure. It's so nice to realize the best thing I can do is relax and talk to people. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've had a few times just because I've been in the game long enough, I think. I've got some people who follow my work, and it's been funny and I find it almost comical. I'll be at some art event and they're like, "You're Mark McKenna." And I'm like, "Yep." The Mark McKenna. And to me, it's almost just hilarious that somebody thinks I'm anything special,
Yeah.
And
it feels weird.
It feels really weird. And to me, it's like, we start to have a conversation and I agree. Like I love just having a real conversation with people and I recognize that somebody puts me on a pedestal for some reason or another. And it's like for some reason they see me almost as a celebrity. And I don't want that kind of treatment. I don't want that perspective. I don't like that. Just feels odd and weird because I do look at myself every day and I'm just this normal Joe who's trying to take care of his family. And I have all these real life problems that everybody else has. And I just have this skill that I guess is kind of unique. And yeah, it's such a breath of fresh air when you can just have a real down to earth conversation with somebody. And they're not tiptoeing around you or whatever. And I could see how that goes the other way when you're talking to somebody who's a potential, client who has a lot of expendable income to purchase art. And it's like, you know what, you're just another person. And I don't know, it's helped me to realize that everybody is just normal. And just because they're pretty well known for some particular reason, they're still just a regular person. And there's really not a lot of reason to treat them differently than somebody else. And that is, you should be respectful to everybody. And kind, and just have a real life conversation about the realities of life. And I love that aspect. That's one of my favorite aspects of being an artist, is going to these shows and just having conversations with people from all these different walks of life. And, I just think it's fascinating to see where people have come from and where they've gone to and how they've gotten there. And anyway, I feel like I'm going off in La La Land here, but
no, that's super important. I think that maybe this is the best business lesson for people that we can give them at this point. If somebody isn't interesting to you, it's either because they're not being real with you or you're not listening. Because if you dig deep enough, like, think of the people the closest. They've gone through some stuff that you really admire that they came out of it, or they have a skill set that just blows you away, or a personality, or the ability to be patient through things that I couldn't even fathom going through. And you know what I mean? It's just, and that, in the end, I think that's what we're after. You have to do something business wise with your artwork. So why not just make it an enjoyable social experience? And that is the secret to success. Just enjoy people, listen to people, ask them questions, and share what you have to offer them. You're still going to, just by being human, you're not going to fall off your pedestal. You're still going to be up there because your work is so dang good. And if it's not, get it good. And they're going to appreciate. Some artists have a strategy and they create this mystique, but it's fake, and you're always going to have that mystique with people that don't know you. Let them feel that way. But when they meet you, it's even better because you lose the mystique, but now they know the person connected with the art that gave them that feeling. And it's more meaningful. It's bigger. And that's a good way to live your life. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And I think that's some really great food for thought. I guess I kind of want to wrap things up. I think that's a really great place to kind of end, but maybe, if you could go back and talk to yourself 10, 15 years ago, when you're kind of getting rolling with the art, or talk to somebody who's in that position now, one or two things, 1 or 2 points, keys of advice, what would that be?
Well, I don't know the future, but I know the past. So I'll give the 2020 hindsight one first. Looking at myself in the past, I would go back and say, don't stress. It's all going to work out. Yeah. It's going to be okay. So when things get hard, and they will, just realize that there's going to be an end to this, and you're going to succeed. It's going to be fine. And because there was never, I can't say I never thought, what if this isn't going to work? I did, but I didn't carry it very far. Yeah. And so, applying that to other people, I would say, I don't know what the future holds. What if our economy tanks so hardcore that there's only 100 artists in the country that can still make a living as an artist? Well, then your chances are gone. You're not going to make it. Right. But then
I'm going to be in that 100. I'm going to be one of those.
Yeah, right. But barring that, there's plenty of room at the top. Anybody who, I firmly believe this. I've taught a lot of people. I've watched a lot of people grow through me teaching them, or side by side with me as I was a college student. the people who work the hardest will combined with humility. If you understand, if you know that you don't know, and you don't get to an arrogant position that doesn't allow you to learn, that's probably the number one stumbling block. If you're humble enough and you work really, really hard and you don't give up, you're going to get there. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And as far as more practical advice along those lines, I would say paint from life, whether it's humans, landscapes, still life, whatever. Understand how to translate what comes through your eyeballs onto canvas without anything in between as best you can. Learn all you can about good composition. And that doesn't mean memorize all of the rules and read all the books. It means figure out something that really makes sense to you, that resonates with yourself and the general public. Like, okay, that idea of big, simple value shapes making up the painting really makes sense to me. So I'm going to do all I can to understand that and apply it to everything I paint. And then figure out a product that you can make that is exciting to you and that you can create a pathway to get there, to create it. And then do everything you can to learn how to do it. Workshops, ateliers, whatever you need to do. Just work hard, learn hard, stay focused, and don't lose hope, and keep moving forward. Sounds really general, but that's what I got.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's valuable and very practical. As I keep doing this podcast and as I'm, trying to figure this out as an artist and providing for a family, there's just those certain things that there's a lot of right ways to make this happen. And so I'm trying to find what those common key elements are that lead people to success. And I think everything you said, that's right on spot, right on the dot. And,
I pass. I get an A.
Yes, you get an A, Albin.
I said the right things.
A for awesome and Albin. Yeah. Anyway, well, I think we're going to end it there. And again, thank you so much for being here and for imparting your experiences and your history and everything that goes along with that. I think that hopefully those who are listening have one or two more little nuggets of wisdom that they can take and push along with. So
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, all of you out there, Mark's in this because he talked to me about this before he started this program, this podcast and whatnot that he's got going on, because he wants to help you. He wants to contribute, and he has a vast amount of knowledge, and he's accessing the professionals that know. So, I hope we have some answers that help, but just know that this is legit. And you're getting the best advice that we can give you. And Mark's on the ball for giving you guys access to the best information you can get.
Oh, I'm trying, and I appreciate that, Albin. Check out Albin's links down below the video. I have all of those there. So if you want to check out his work, make sure and click those and take a look at what he's doing. If you don't know, it's absolutely worthwhile. He knows what he's talking about. So
I would appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Happy painting. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. If you're interested in resources and education to help you successfully create art and then sell it, please check out the Business of Art course in the link below. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.